I didn't hear the forest the way I usually did that morning. Instead, I heard a sound that froze me in place, a high, raw cry that didn't belong to any bird or fox I knew. It wasn't the sharp bark of a deer or the scream of a hare. It was thinner, jagged, almost human in its pain. I stopped halfway to the shed, straining my ears. The cry came again, cutting through the air like something torn. I put down the bucket in my hand. My first thought was that some animal had been caught in wire or hurt by a passing car. The road was not far from my house, and I had seen more than once what could happen there. But when I walked past the corner of the building and looked toward the tree line, I saw something I would never forget. A lynx stood at the edge of the clearing. She didn't bolt, didn't vanish into the undergrowth the moment she saw me. She stood, trembling slightly, her ears flat, her mouth open as though the cries had been torn straight out of her throat. And at her side, no, not just at her side, but dragging weakly beneath her jaws, was a small, limp cub. For a second, I thought my eyes were playing tricks. A wild lynx, here, so close in full daylight, and not running, but moving toward me. I felt my stomach drop. Every instinct screamed to back away, to get inside, to shut the door. But I didn't move. My legs might as well have been nailed to the ground. She took another step forward. The cub hung in her jaws, but its body didn't kick, didn't squirm like a healthy young one should. Its head lolled, and with each breath I thought I saw the ribs push out, shallow, strained. The mother's eyes locked on mine. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't even fear. It was something I couldn't name. Desperation, maybe, or something close to begging. The cry came again, but this time it wasn't from her. The sound was softer, rasping, broken. The cub tried to call out, but it came as a thin whistle of air. The lynx set it down on the dirt, just a few meters from me. Then she backed off a step, crouching low, tail twitching, her eyes never leaving mine. I felt the blood rush to my ears. My body said danger. This was a predator, wild and powerful, only a few steps away. But everything else in me said something different. That she hadn't come to strike. That this animal, who should have feared me, was instead giving me her cub. I crouched down slowly. My palms were damp, my throat dry. The cub lay on the ground, sides heaving with effort. Its eyes were half open, glazed, its paws limp. I could hear the faintest rattle in its chest, like each breath might be the last. The mother shifted her weight, but didn't lunge. She just watched. I stretched a hand closer. The cub didn't react. It didn't even flinch when my fingers brushed the fur along its side. The coat was warm, but too warm, feverish. I had felt that heat before in sick dogs, in calves when infection set in. I lifted the small body carefully, and it was lighter than I expected, frighteningly fragile. Its head rolled against my arm, and for a moment I thought I'd been too late. The lynx let out another low sound. Not a growl, not a warning, but something else entirely. I glanced up and saw her eyes fixed on me, ears still pinned, but no move to attack. It was as though she was urging me, pushing me to do something, anything. My chest tightened. I had never been trained for this. I wasn't a vet. I wasn't a rescuer. I was just a man who lived by the forest, used to hearing its sounds, used to seeing animals from a distance. But now there was no distance. Now a wild mother had crossed the line between her world and mine. I held the cub tighter. The lynx didn't stop me. She didn't flee either. She stayed where she was, tense, ready to move if I hurt her young. But when I stood, carrying the small body against my chest, she only took another step back. Her cry this time was quieter, almost a breath. That was the moment it struck me. There was no walking away, no shutting the door and pretending I hadn't seen this. The cub's shallow breath against my arm, the mother's eyes burning into mine, the weight of it all pressed down like a hand on my back. Whatever happened next, I was in it. The lynx had placed her trust, or her last hope, in me, and I didn't know if I could live up to it. I carried the cub inside, my arms stiff, as if the slightest wrong move would break it. The door creaked shut behind me, muffling the sounds of the clearing. My hands shook. On the table lay an animal I had never imagined holding, wild, feverish, half-conscious. I laid it down carefully on an old blanket I used for the dogs years ago. The cub let out a faint rasp, chest rising in shallow bursts. I stood frozen, brain scrambling. What do you do for a sick lynx cub? I knew how to deal with calves born weak, with puppies that needed warming, with birds that had fallen from nests. But this? I swallowed hard, and force myself to move. Some instincts are the same across life. Warmth, water, air. That's where I had to start. I stoked the stove quickly, though my hands fumbled with the matches. A wave of heat filled the room. Then I grabbed an old wool blanket from the chair, folded it, and wrapped it loosely around the cub's body. Its ears twitched faintly, but it didn't resist. Too weak to fight. I filled a small mug with lukewarm water. I didn't dare pour it. Instead, I found a spoon and tried to let a drop touch its lips. At first, nothing. Its jaw stayed slack. Then a flicker, the tongue moved. I tried again, tilting the spoon just so. This time, a few drops slid inside. It coughed, a thin, wet sound, but swallowed. I almost laughed out of relief. "That's it, little one. Just a bit more," I muttered. My voice sounded strange, too loud in the quiet room. The lynx outside let out a muffled cry. My eyes darted to the window. Through the glass I saw her pacing, ears sharp, tail jerking. She didn't come close to the house, but stayed near the tree line, restless, her shape shifting between shadows. Every so often, she let out a low, guttural call. Not angry, something else. The kind of sound that makes your chest tighten. I tried milk next. Cow's milk wasn't right for wild animals, but it was all I had. I warmed it slightly and dripped a few drops onto my finger before letting them fall at the edge of the cub's mouth. It stirred, then licked weakly. It wasn't much, but it was something. Minutes stretched. The cub's breathing rattled. Its small body twitched now and then, as if trying to kick, but the strength wasn't there. I rubbed its side gently, remembering how I had once massaged the chest of a newborn calf that wouldn't breathe right. Sometimes touch stirred life back. My hand moved in slow circles, pressing lightly, coaxing. There were moments I thought it was over. The breath paused, the body stilled. My heart hammered until a faint rise of the chest came again. Each time felt like losing and winning at once. I tried water again. A few more drops went down. Then I wrapped the cub tighter, leaving its nose free. The heat of the stove spread through the small room. Sweat ran down my back, but the cub's body still felt too cool under my hands. The mother outside cried again, closer this time. I tensed. Would she break through the window, the door? My pulse spiked at the thought, but she didn't. She circled once, then sat in the grass, just visible in the corner of my vision. Watching, I kept at it. Drops of water, a little milk, rubbing, warming. The hours dragged. The cub whimpered weakly at times, a sound like paper tearing. Once, its paw twitched against my hand, claws barely pricking my skin. That small movement jolted me more than anything. But the fear grew too. I knew this couldn't last. I had no medicine, no training beyond farm tricks. Every shallow breath reminded me that whatever I was doing might not be enough. I glanced at the old phone on the shelf more than once. Should I call someone? A vet in the village, maybe? But the thought of explaining, of leading someone back here, felt impossible. And if I took the cub away, would the mother follow? Would she attack? Or vanish forever, convinced I had stolen her young? Dusk crept in. The stove hissed softly, the only steady sound besides the labored breaths of the cub. My eyes burned from staring too long, from holding too still. I forced another spoonful of water against its mouth. This time, it swallowed with less struggle, as if some strength had returned. Hope flared, fragile but real. Then, as quickly as it came, the cub went limp again. Its head rolled to the side, and the breaths grew fainter than ever. My stomach turned cold. I leaned closer, pressing 2 fingers to its small chest. A beat, slow, thready, but there. Barely. I sat back, dragging both hands through my hair. My thoughts spun in circles. Stay here and keep trying? Or risk the road? Risk the village? Risk losing the only chance this cub had? The weight of the decision pressed down harder than the heat of the room. And outside, the mother's low cry cut through the twilight, making it clear I wasn't the only one waiting for an answer. By the time night fell, I knew I couldn't keep going like this. The cub's breaths were shallow, each one sounding weaker than the last. My hands ached from hours of rubbing its chest. My head spun from staring at the rise and fall that seemed ready to stop at any moment. I had done all I could, but I wasn't enough. That truth pressed harder than the weight of the animal in my arms, and I realized that if I stayed here much longer, I would simply watch it fade away. I stood, cradling the small body against my chest. Through the window, the mother still lingered near the tree lean, her shape barely visible in the fading light. She didn't come closer. She paced, stopped, turned, restless, but never stepped onto the open yard again. Her cries had grown quieter, fewer, almost resigned, as if she knew she had reached the limit of what she could do. I whispered into the room, maybe to myself, maybe to her beyond the glass. I can't save it here. I have to take it. My voice cracked on the last words, more fragile than I expected. The thought of loading a wild lynx cub into my truck would have sounded insane just yesterday. Tonight, it was the only choice left. I wrapped the cub in the wool blanket, tucking it gently so the head stayed free. It stirred faintly, a weak paw twitching against the fabric, then went limp again. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. When I opened the door, cool air rushed in, carrying with it the damp scent of grass and pine. The lynx was there, ears flicking, tail twitching, eyes locked on me. For a long second, we both froze. My pulse hammered, every muscle braced for her to leap. But she didn't. She let out one sharp cry, cutting, pained, but stayed at the edge of the trees. Her paws shifted against the grass as though she might move, but she didn't. She stood, rigid, watching me carry her cub away. I tried not to meet her gaze as I stepped toward the truck. Each footfall felt like betrayal. My hand shook as I pulled the door open and set the bundle on the passenger seat. The cub gave a weak cough, startling me so much I almost dropped the keys. I adjusted the blanket again, tucking it close, whispering empty reassurances. We're going. Just hold on. Don't give up yet. The door of the truck clicked shut, echoing in the silence. I turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Too loud, breaking the strange stillness. I glanced out the window one last time. The lynx hadn't moved. She was a dark figure against darker trees, unblinking, frozen in place. A part of me wanted to stop, to put the cub back, to undo this moment. But the sound of its wheeze pulled me forward. The tires crunched on the gravel as I pulled onto the track. My hands clamped the wheel, but my eyes kept flicking toward the small shape beside me. Every bump in the road made me fear the tiny chest would stop rising for good. The cab smelled faintly of old oil and wool, but now every breath of mine was synced with the cub's, waiting for it to falter. The forest road stretched ahead, uneven and narrow. My headlights caught branches that whipped past, shadows shifting like figures in the night. The cub wheezed softly, the sound so fragile it barely rose above the engine. Each rasp stabbed through me, pushing my foot harder on the gas. I muttered words without thinking, hold on, just a little more, stay with me, don't quit now, as though it could understand, as though my voice alone could anchor it. The road into the village felt endless. At every turn, I half expected the cub to fall silent. Once, I pulled over, heart in my throat, to check. My hand pressed against its chest. Still beating. Weak, but there. I exhaled shakily, forehead pressed to the steering wheel, before forcing myself back onto the road. Each kilometer felt like a lifetime. The village was quiet, most houses dark, shutters drawn. Only the faint yellow glow of the street lamps guided me. My truck rattled over the cobblestones, the sound too loud in the sleeping town. I prayed the vet was still there, or that he lived nearby. My mind ran through desperate alternatives, breaking in, calling out, leaving the cub at the doorstep, but I didn't let myself stop driving. By the time I reached the dim lights of the veterinary clinic, the night was thick and still. The parking lot was empty, the sign above the door unlit. My pulse hammered so loud it filled my ears. Maybe no one was there. Maybe I had wasted the last chance. I climbed out, clutching the bundle, and pushed through the glass door. A bell rang overhead, jarring in the silence. From the back, footsteps approached, uneven at first, then quicker. A man in a white coat appeared, rubbing his eyes as if he'd been woken. His gaze dropped to what I carried, and he froze mid-step. Is that? His voice trailed off. A lynx cub, I said quickly, the words catching in my throat. It's dying. Please. He didn't ask how or why. He turned on his heel and gestured sharply. Here. Bring it here. His tone left no room for argument. The next minutes blurred. Bright lights snapped on overhead, harsh and sterile. Stainless steel trays clattered as instruments were pulled free. The cub was laid out on a table that looked far too cold for something so fragile. The vet moved fast, checking breathing, listening to the chest, preparing syringes. I stood against the wall, fists clenched, feeling useless, my back pressed so hard to the plaster it hurt. He worked quietly but with precision, sliding a needle into the cub's tiny leg, adjusting a mask over its nose, speaking in short, firm words that weren't meant for me, but for himself. Dehydrated. Severe respiratory infection. Malnourished. Each phrase landed like a blow. His hands never stopped moving, switching tools, adjusting tubes, watching the monitors that flickered with tiny numbers I didn't understand. I wanted to ask 100 questions, but my throat locked. I just watched as he slipped fluid through a tube, adjusted the oxygen, pressed his stethoscope again and again to the tiny chest. Once, he frowned so deeply I thought it was over. But then he nodded to himself, adjusted something, and the faint wheeze lifted a little. I exhaled only when I realized I'd been holding my breath. I couldn't say how long it lasted. Minutes? Hours. Time dissolved under the buzz of the lights and the steady rhythm of his work, pulling the cub back from the edge inch by inch. My legs ached from standing still, my palms damp, every muscle locked in silent prayer. Every so often, the thought crept back of the lynx mother at the tree lean, waiting, maybe searching, maybe already gone. The image haunted me, sharper than the white walls around me. At last, the vet straightened, pulling off his gloves with a snap that cracked through the quiet room. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes weren't hopeless. He glanced at me and spoke plainly. "It's not safe yet, but it has a chance." The words struck like a weight lifted from my chest. Not safe, but a chance. That was more than I had been able to give. I looked at the small body on the table, wrapped now in cleaner blankets, breathing a little more evenly under the mask. I whispered, more to myself than anyone, "Then we did the right thing." The vet didn't answer. He was already preparing notes, setting bottles aside, moving with the efficiency of someone who had done this countless times. His focus never wavered, as though this cub was simply one more patient among many. But to me, it was everything. I stayed rooted in place, unable to look away, even as the night deepened outside and silence pressed against the windows. The cub was alive for now, and the mother in the forest would never know if her desperate act had been enough. The thought cut deeper than I wanted to admit, leaving me standing there longer than I should have, holding on to the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, we'd bought it more than a few hours of life. The days that followed were a blur of routine and worry, stretched longer than I imagined they could. I stayed near the clinic more than I should have, finding excuses to return, sometimes twice in a single day. Each time I asked the same question, was the cub still alive? And each time, the vet gave me an answer that was cautious, deliberate, but not hopeless. Still weak, but improving. Or, the fever is lower. It's breathing better. Those short phrases became the rhythm that held me together, the only progress I could measure. I wasn't allowed to handle the cub after that first night. The vet and his assistants were strict about it, and I couldn't argue. Wild animals weren't meant to be passed from hand to hand like pets, and I respected that boundary. But I lingered in the background, watching whenever they allowed me inside the room. The cub, once limp and burning with fever, now twitched its paws in sleep. Its sides lifted with steadier breaths. Once, I saw it open its eyes just enough to track movement in the room. That tiny flicker, just a sliver of awareness, was enough to make me feel that the sleepless nights had been worth it. Each evening, I walked home through the quiet streets of the village, carrying the heavy silence of not knowing. I'd sit awake at my kitchen table long after midnight, replaying every sound I'd heard in that clinic, the rattling breaths, the small cries, the steady voice of the vet explaining what he was doing. The image of the lynx mother at the edge of the tree lean haunted me. I couldn't shake it. Did she linger there even now, searching, calling into empty spaces? Or had she already moved on, forced by instinct to survive? On the fourth day, the vet called me aside. His tone was calm, professional, but heavy with decision. "It's stable," he said. "No longer in immediate danger. But it can't stay here. It's wild, and we can't raise it. The best chance is to return it where the mother left it." The words landed like stones in my chest. I had known, deep down, that this moment would come. I wasn't saving a pet. I wasn't meant to keep it. My role had only been to bridge the gap, to hold the line long enough for it to have another chance. But the thought of letting go after everything, it cut sharper than I expected. I wanted to argue, to ask for more time, but I knew he was right. That evening, I prepared a small wooden crate. I lined it with clean blankets from home, making sure there was space for air and movement. I carried it carefully to the truck, listening to the faint, restless sounds the cub made inside. They weren't the desperate rasps from before, but small whimpers, uneven and alive. My hands lingered on the box before I lifted it into the passenger seat, as if part of me needed to memorize its weight. The drive back into the forest felt different. Slower, heavier. The road I had raced down in fear only days earlier now seemed endless in another way. Every tree I passed, every bend in the track, carried the memory of that desperate night. I kept glancing at the crate, half expecting the little body to vanish if I looked away too long. Once, I pulled over and lifted the blanket just to see its chest rising. That small movement kept me going. By the time I reached the edge of the clearing, the light was thinning, and evening dew clung to the grass. The forest was silent except for the faint rustle of leaves, a stillness so deep it pressed into my skin. I cut the engine, and the silence thickened around me. For a long moment, I didn't move. My fingers gripped the wheel, unwilling to open the door, as if delaying would change what I had to do. Finally, I lifted the crate and carried it a few steps into the clearing. My chest felt tight as I set it down on the damp grass. The cub shifted inside, a paw pressing weakly against the slats, and a faint cry slipped out. I whispered, not knowing who I was speaking to. I hope she's still here. I hope she comes. I stepped back, slowly at first, then farther, until I was nearly at the opposite tree line. My eyes never left the crate. The forest seemed to hold its breath with me. A crow called in the distance, then fell silent again. I clenched my hands, every part of me screaming to stay, to wait, though I knew it wasn't mine to control. Minutes dragged on. Nothing moved. I told myself it was foolish to expect anything more, that wild animals don't come on command, not even after something like this. But still I stayed rooted to the spot. My thoughts kept circling back to the mother. Had she already left this place behind? Or was she hidden somewhere nearby, unseen but aware? Then, just at the edge of my vision, a shadow shifted. Low, cautious, almost invisible against the undergrowth. A shape I thought I recognized, though I couldn't swear to it. It paused, melted back, then appeared again, closer. The outline of pointed ears, the fluid, careful step of a cat. My chest locked tight. I didn't breathe. My eyes strained to follow as the figure crept closer to the crate. The cub whimpered again, and that sound seemed to pull the shadow nearer. It lingered, half in light, half in darkness, no more than a silhouette. For a brief moment, I thought I saw eyes glint like coals catching light. Then the figure slipped forward another step, soundless. I forced myself to move. I turned and walked toward the truck, each step feeling like an argument with my own body. I didn't look back until I reached the door. When I finally glanced over my shoulder, the clearing was empty except for the crate. The shadow was gone, or maybe hidden. I would never know. I closed the truck door and sat there, hands gripping the wheel, heart thudding in my chest. Had she come back? Was that truly the mother? Or was it only my mind, filling in what I wanted to believe? I couldn't know. Maybe I never would. All I knew was that I had left the cub where it belonged. The rest, for better or worse, was no longer mine to carry. The forest would decide what happened next, and I would carry only the memory of being trusted for one brief moment, with a life that was never meant to be mine.